there would be some things that are quite actually kind of fixed.
Yep.
And other things that are quite different.
Means I get a shock every time I look in the mirror.
Yeah.
My mother figures out at me.
Yeah. 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 So there is that aspect of it, and so when I say that it's quite, the body schema is updatable, there are some things that we actually freeze in time. It's sort of paradoxical, but both things happen. And what were the descriptors then compared to now? What would they be different? Those whatever you shouted out before, they were very transient. Is it on?
Yep, is it on? Now it is now. So what are the what would have been the descriptors 20 years ago or 30 years ago? 30 years ago it might have been wah! No, less than that. You were just like a twinkle in mum and dad's eye. I was looking at Narayan. 30 years ago he was he would have been pre-twinkle. Yeah. Very different or not so different? Very different. Yeah. For the better or for the worse? Or doesn't matter, there's no qualitative, there's no judgment about it, just different. Yeah. Yeah. So you're getting kinder, do you think? Right, yeah. So, yeah, you're getting a bit less, I was saying that for the tape, less judgmental. Okay, what's the next slide? I did look, but I've forgotten. Okay, so let's think more about this emotional stuff. When I say the following body parts, and it can be as simple as whether you feel kindly towards them, you feel unkindly towards them, or neutral. So shut your eyes, or if you're drinking, don't shut your eyes because you'll... you can flick them all through. So just don't look at the screen, that's all. Nose. Face. Eyes. Legs. Knees. Feet. Hands. Back. Neck. Arms. Elbows. Pelvis. Okay, so open your eyes. There's the list. So roughly speaking, what's the kind of ratio of how many that you felt positively towards, like you felt warmly towards that part, versus, nah, don't really like you, versus don't care, neither like nor dislike. You are what you are. Elbows, they are what they are. Nothing? Mostly like? Yeah. Any ones that you feel betray you, that you'd like, you feel a bit antsy about? Neck. Work in progress. The wrinkly hands. Yeah, my hands used to be my favourite, but now when I watch them working, because I obviously watch them working a lot, the slight wrinkliness is, I'm a bit lukewarm about them. Yeah, it's not fair, is it? It's not kind. So we can work on this kindness aspect. So you can, maybe getting the sense that this sort of the emotional flavour of how you view different parts of your body is also another sense in a way, isn't it? Like the sense of ownership and the sense of agency. And again, you can get this idea that they're all interlinked in a way. They're different sorts of concepts, but they all interact. Next. So if we think about this construct, this is more, when you start working with other people, that there are lots of different ways that really seriously disrupt the body image. So all of us have got the potential to perfect the body image, the self-image more. That's the whole point of Feldenkrais. We're a work in progress. However, there are these things that can tip into, like, what is a pathology in a way, which is not a nice way of saying it necessarily, but this is sort of like the extreme version of troubles and issues with body image. So you've heard us talk about phantom limb pain. So people who've had an amputation and they have pain in the limb that they no longer have. And obviously I don't know what that's like because I've got all my limbs. But I've worked with people who have phantom limb pain, and it is crippling. And you think, how can pain in a limb that doesn't exist be crippling? But this is the power of this sort of neuroplastic malwiring to create a pain in a limb that doesn't even exist. So sometimes it's not even a pain; it's like a paresthesia. So that means a para means sort of abnormal, and thesia means sensation. So they can have things like, crawling sensation, or they can have a sense that their hand is clenching and they can't unclench a hand that doesn't exist, or, and therefore their nails are growing into there. It can be very graphic. It can pulse. It can be really hot. It can be really cold. It can be really big. It can be kind of constricted. All sorts of really unusual sensations or perceptions of what that limb is like, and that this is the limb that does not exist. And there's a bit of a view that the more traumatic the incident was, that the limb was lost, the worse the sensations, the more abnormal they can be. That could just be, well, there could be a lot of reasons for that. A planned amputation, so someone who's diabetic and they've got ulcers, so it's a very planned, well-controlled amputation, they're less likely to have phantom limb pain. If people get a prosthesis really quickly, they're far less likely to have phantom limb pain. So if they get a replacement, so that speaks a little bit to that notion that if the brain is, that part of the brain that's now kind of sitting up there idle, and think about if it's an upper limb, there's a lot of territory. If they've lost a whole hand and forearm, there's a lot of territory up here that's going, what's happening? No one's talking to me. I've got nothing to do. Give it something to do with a prosthesis, and there is that suggestion that's it. Then gives that territory something to do, and they have less of this make-believe stuff. So it's the idle hands at the devil's playground, or is that the way you say it? Idle hands, devil's work, something like that. Anyway, so that's a current theory. So all sorts of interesting things to help people with phantom limb pain. The mirror box therapy came about because of that, so that people could, they haven't got this hand, but they can do this with this hand, and then they look at the mirror and they see their sort of image, a right hand, which is actually an image, and then their brain gets sort of interested in that, and then they disassociate pain because it looks fine, so it looks normal. So it's hard to have a perception that your hand is clenching like this when you see this right hand image, and it's all nice and relaxed and flopping over and doing nice normal things. So they're trying to get the brain to stop misperceiving. So this, the phantom limb pain being the most gross and cruel kind of misperception. I saw it. I haven't. This wasn't written up as a paper, but I saw it on a sort of a Catalyst kind of show, where this an artist was working with people with phantom limb sensations and pain, and there was a picture of them on the screen with their intact hand, and then this hand, and she would Photoshop and morph the phantom limb how they described it, like, and some of them are really graphic, like kind of gashed, or, one was wrapped around with barbed wire, or big, or in a big thumb, or all these weird things that people perceive. So they actually reproduce the sensations visually on the screen, and they'd look at it and go, yeah, that, they kept on dapping it till it looked like what they felt. And then slowly over time, they would morph the really odd image to a normal hand, just sort of slowly, incrementally change it to look like a regular hand, and see if that would also work in that same way for sort of dealing with the misperception. And they had some good effect. I don't know. I think they took several days, and they kept on coming back to it. No. And whether they need to reboot again and do it again because, they go away, their brain starts doing all this phantom business again, and they come back and correct. There's probably that kind of process happening. With my colleague with the stroke, who comes and helps me with my research, when she looks, we've made a tape of her with this whole body mirror image thing. And it's an illusion. It's a bit like you were saying before about the engagement. If she can really engage and think that that's really a true image of her with two normal arms moving, she could get, even if it wasn't real time, she just watched the video of that. She could reduce the pain in her hemi shoulder. If she wore the same shirt in real life as she saw on the screen, the pain got less because the illusion was greater. So that she could trick her brain into perceiving a normal set of limbs if she went along with the illusion as much as possible. So even the video wasn't even in real time. So, we haven't reproduced that finding with anybody else. I haven't written it up yet, but it's interesting. This is about work. If we accept that the brain is making stuff up anyway, can we train it to make different stuff up? Is the kind of point. However, when I have clients who are really, they're really tortured with their chronic pain, that people won't believe them because there's no real reason. There's not a reason in their back anymore. They've healed or whatever it is. I always talk to them about phantom pain. That it's real. It's as real as it can. It's real in their mind. It doesn't mean that they're making it up and it's fake. The brain is making it up, but it's not fake. So you have to get this across to people, that you believe them about their pain, because this not being believed and they're making it up and therefore they should be able to get over it is probably one of the worst things that happen with people with chronic pain. Phantom limb pain is so well understood. It's so well chronicled. Nobody questions that. So I use that as a story to say to people, and I've seen people with the pain is so, they'll break out in a sweat. It's what.
So can you use the same sort of treatments with chronic pain as you
Yes,
do with
they're trying to do mirror box therapy, and it does work with some people. Yep. You've had mirror box with your hand? Yep. Did it work? No. It's not as good as the Ramachandra guy said it. He wrote it up. He wrote it up like it was the next miracle thing. It works for some people. There's other things like graded motor imagery, where you continue to work with imagining movement with more and more ease. Sounds familiar. And those sorts of things for chronic pain.
Could you, like in a mirror box, if you wanted to, say, teach yourself to write with your left hand, does it work with things like that? If you watched yourself writing with your right hand for a period of time, do you know if they've done studies?
No,
on that
I've never
sort of
read
thing?
it. You could try it.
No, it's just wondering if you can learn something in that in that way as well as
give it a crack. It's interesting. I mean, if I am extremely distracted and I don't think about it, like if I switch off my thinking bits, I can still do mirror writing. When I was younger, I could do it much easier. If you do it at the same time, it's actually easier. But you can interfere with it, because if you think about it, I can't do it.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of Leonardo da Vinci mirror writing stuff. So maybe a mirror would trigger. I don't know. There's nothing that I've read about it. But yeah. Okay, so it's phantom pain, chronic pain, neglect. I've already talked about this bizarre thing where people they no longer recognise that a limb is theirs. Most often it's left-sided, because it was thought that the perceptual stuff around that, about body ownership, was more in the right side of the brain. But now, with more careful studies, you can have right-sided neglect as well. And it can be not only the actual limb itself, but it can be the space around it. So you can have a left-sided neglect, that this side of the world doesn't exist for you. So that if people come up on this side of you, you actually don't see them. Now, there is a visual disturbance where you physically don't see them, but this is where you just don't pay attention to that side, which is why I was going to be on the attention show for SBS. And they'll do really weird things, like one of the tests for it is you get them to draw a clock. So the pelvic clock would be I've never actually taught the pelvic clock to someone with serious neglect. So normally we'd draw a circle and we'd 12 around till, 1 around to 12. They'll write all the letters down the right-hand side from 1 to 12. So they just don't have a left side, not only in their own body, but in the world. The world doesn't have a left side, for example. Or if you give them a plate of food, and this is it more if they've got extra personal neglect, they'll eat the food on the right side of the plate and they'll leave it on the left side. They're just, it's not there for them. It's not that they can't see it. They usually have a full vision. It's that they don't pay attention to it. Right. Yeah. It's really weird. A guy that I was assessing for one of our projects last year, I went into the acute stroke unit. And I don't see many people with acute stroke anymore. And I'd forgotten just how bad people can be straight after a stroke. I stood on the right side of his bed to talk to him, and his comprehension was 100% fine. I had to go around to the left side to move his very dense hemiplegic arm, and was talking to him. It's like I just wasn't there. And I would direct his attention, get him turn his head. I was in his field of vision. He could barely understand me. I had to break my sentences down into 3-word phrases for him to understand me, because attending even in an auditory kind of way. So it's not visual, just visual. It's auditory, somatosensory. It's like the left world doesn't exist. So it's really bizarre. And you think, so therefore, if you can lose that, we've learned to create that. We've learned to create this spatial awareness. And you all know, when we've been doing ATMs, that you know normally our awareness is kind of here, and then we start doing an ATM and you feel like your awareness is here, and then you feel like my awareness is actually all around me. Well, imagine, that's how I imagine it is that instead of awareness being here, it's like there. It's madness, isn't it? And so it's very hard for these people to know what they don't know. So the people that I usually work with, who are many years down the track, they'll say, I've got neglect. They'll say, yeah, I've got this signal called neglect. You know what it is. They know it intellectually. They have to keep reminding themselves cognitively that they've got a left side. So remember this one guy who would say, oh, you've got this neglect thing. They always reminding me because I forget my left side. And he went, oh, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, he wasn't safe to walk. He could walk if you kept reminding him he's got a left side. But if you let him go and distracted him, he'd fall over because he'd forget he's got a left side and he wouldn't move it. I've got him on video. He's lying down on the plinth like this, and he had to get up into sitting. So he puts his right leg over and he pushes up. This arm is back here because he's forgotten he's got it. And he's pushing up like this. And he gets to here. This leg's over the edge. And he gets to here and he goes, ow, ow, oh, you girls, you're horrible. You make me do horrible things. You know I can't do this. Ow, ow, ow. His left hip was killing him because it was like this. Mm-hmm. But he couldn't problem solve that his left leg, he'd forgotten his left leg because it wasn't there again, even with the pain there. So it can be very profound. Now, that he's about 3 years post-stroke. That's probably about as bad as I've seen in the long term. But it was so, he couldn't go home. He had to be in a nursing home, even though he was actually quite able, because he was not safe. No. I didn't, he was in a project, I didn't keep seeing him. He got, that was 3 years post, I wasn't working with him, you know. So as far as I know, no. And I've never seen anybody get better in a nursing home. Maybe now they do, because there's more stuff going in. This is 5 years ago. So neglect is a very weird thing. It can be personal, peri-personal, extra-personal neglect. And those sorts of spatial disorders. Now, I've got a spatial disorder about left and right. It's just not clear to me. Left, you know, I have not, as one of my neuropsych friends, Susan, you're just not fully lateralised. However, I'm okay with up and down and in front of and behind. But there's some people who are not that clear about that sort of stuff. Oh, sorry, Gloria.
That's right.
You're
No,
just waiting for me to draw
No,
breath.
I was waiting for you to say something that linked.
Okay.
Because you did, and then you went off, but you come back. So there's a milder example of that I've always noticed in classrooms is that sometimes teachers tell me about these kids that have behaviour problems, and they're and I notice that. So when I go and watch, and I notice that these teachers are startled by these kids.
Startled. Uh-huh.
And they have this little so then what I do is I just shift the kids' table to over this side of the room or in front of the teacher, so that then they're in the, like, it's almost like the non-dominant looking room. You know, they might have their desk here and they're not looking over here, and suddenly there's this child moving, and so because they're constantly startled by the kid, they go, oh, that kid's always a problem. You know, and they don't even realise.
Right.
So by shifting the kid into their field of vision,
Yeah.
into their more dominant field of vision, or shifting the teacher's table, so that they've got the whole room in view.
Yeah.
It actually can make quite a big difference.
Okay.
Just a simple thing like that, just dominant eye or whatever, dominant field of vision.
Well, that from
stuff.
a visual point of view, if our central vision is our acuity vision, it's where we see things to recognise them, and our peripheral vision. So when I'm looking at you, I can see someone's hand moving here. I can't see who it is, I think, but I can see the movement, because peripheral vision is for movement detection.
Yeah, sure, makes sense.
So it absolutely makes sense that here, none of your movements do any, you know, because I'm looking at you and I'm recognising you and I'm naming you. Here, what I'm seeing here is, I know it's Philippa's leg because I know exactly what she's doing, but, you know, she's playing around, and I'm going to ignore her because she's just attention seeking. But it's movement, right? That's right. She was like, no, I was just teasing you too. I just thought I'd just get in one more stir before you go, because I know you're going to go and check, huh? Exactly. That's what it's for. That's what it's for. Peripheral vision, movement. Yeah. So what you've done is a really, really, really smart thing.
Yeah. Sometimes the kid gets the label when actually it's a perceptual problem.
Yeah, and an environmental problem, spatial. Yep.
Mm.
And of course, eating disorders. I watched that. You can't ask me that thing about eating disorders. That was interesting. Huh? It's on SBS. Oh, ABC. Must have been on iView. Haven't they? We're very ahead of you in Adelaide. Nah, it's ABC. Must have been iView. I don't know. It was really interesting. Yeah. So they had there's a whole range of eating disorders, you know, and people who are still sort of working with it. But they, you know, the generosity with those people on those interviews is amazing. They, you know, they tackle quite a few myths. It's not just young girls, and it's not just, you know, it's not just a privileged white girl syndrome or whatever they call it. It's, you know, a woman, my God, she looked like she was 75 and she's only 55. You know, it takes a toll. You know, the different kinds of things, and the absolute like knowing that they were not fat, but they were fat. So this complete disconnect between what they felt about themselves. You know, it's a bit. So when I say that I get a shock sometimes that I'm tall, that's a little taster of what these folk feel. You know, that they just feel so different to what they actually are, and it's really it's worth a peek. It's very interesting. Okay, all right. So here's so Butler and Mosley have got this book, Explain Pain. There's a new edition out now. They've created their whole new neuroscience language, which drives me crackers. But anyway, smudging. So remember this earlier today, we were talking about the violinist's hand and the fingers would be clearer, like in the motor and the sensory cortex, they'd be more differentiated, maybe bigger, but certainly more differentiated. And on the non-dominant hand, they wouldn't be as differentiated. The same thing happens with pain. So what happens, this idea of smudging, where the borders in the homunculus, either one, there's all this sort of, you know, with the sort of territorialism of the neurons, there's all these neurons that don't know whether they're interested in this finger or this finger or this finger or this finger. So this is particularly true in like the focal dystonia, is what used to be called writer's cramp. So the nasty pain syndromes of the hand, for example. And so some of the treatment has been around practicing differentiating, you know, with virtual reality pianos. Why they don't send them to Feldenkrais is we need to get off our bums.
Yesterday when we were doing the twiddling of the toes,
Yeah.
it was really interesting because Alison's foot, she won't mind me saying, I hope, really curl under the last 3 toes.
Yeah.
And when I was working with them, I was trying to do it just one at a time with one hand. She couldn't tell which toe I was moving.
Yeah, so they'd be very smudged.
Yeah. And so, but as soon as I separated them, it became very differentiated for her.
Great.
And they didn't curl back under the way they
Fantastic.
had done.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that differentiation stuff that we've done, yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what we're doing. And you can bet your bottom dollar that while you're doing that, there is a change. Now, whether it lasts in the brain or not depends on whether she goes away and uses it. If she goes away and plays the piano with her toes, yeah, it will stay differentiated. But we know it would. I wouldn't have to even do an MEP to I would just know. I'd be that confident.
And talking about the differentiation thing.
Yeah.
Is the process of differentiating, I'm thinking about the FI that you gave me and talking about that, the toes, is the, does integration and disintegration or differentiation have a different neurological purpose?
Probably. Yeah. So with the differentiation, we're really getting your brain to say, oh, I know this is different to that. And that, therefore, we say, you know, people know they've got a hip joint. Actually, what they know is they've got a femur and a pelvis, and that they're 2 separate things, and they stop using them as one thing. And that's why they feel more free in their movement. Mm-hmm. Or they know the difference between toe 3 and toe 4 and toe 5. So they know that this thing is different to that thing, and that would be represented by greater clarity cortically, particularly in M1 and S1. It would. Now, the integration stuff is then more about the global patterns of movement, about do we know how to put them back together again, but not in a holding way, like a co-contracting, make the joint disappear kind of way, but in a more functional way. And that is probably, to the best of our knowledge, is probably requiring a whole cone of neurons, like from the cortex in, that's producing more a greater pattern of movement, and probably very cerebellar as well. The cerebellum is really interested in this sequencing side.
So when you said you wouldn't normally differentiate in an FI?
I differentiate in an FI, but I would often integrate at the end, or do something with the person so that they integrated. Because if someone's really stiff, I would just differentiate, because that's what they need. Because they're, in a way, they're kind of, You could
In a
see,
block.
yeah, they're blocked. And they'll tend back to going into sort of their holding stiffness business. In a way, that's kind of a pattern of movement. With someone like you who is high, is actually has a high degree of differentiation, your maps would be very clearly bordered and clearly articulated in that sense. So what I was doing was actually like differentiation on speed with Philippa. I was actually, instead of just rotating her hip and then feeling the connection going up through, which you could think of as an integration thing, is that you turn and then you turn enough and then the pelvis starts rolling and then if you do it slowly enough, it has kind of an integrative effect. I was holding her pelvis stock still and rotating her hip underneath it. So that is really differentiating. That's saying hip, 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 hip. Pelvis is this, it's still femur, 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 and then left her like that. And I normally wouldn't leave you like that, but we wanted to make it dramatic.
Yeah, so that's the question. So that within an FI, the process of differentiating is it a quietening effect, or neurologically, or is it what?
It's neither quietening
is
nor
it just that it makes that less smudgy.
Makes it less smudgy. It's clarifying. It could be seen as awakening, but less smudgy would be the one way to look at it. Or filling out. See how if that's your mind's eye self-image, I'm not really clear about those things. So that's the 3 toes that I just don't know the difference between.
Or could it slow it down?
It could.
So it's slowing the synaptic connection, the integrating sequence.
Yeah, in a way, it's neither slowing nor raising. It's changing the fire. It's clarifying which neurons are going to pay attention to this, or in a way, it's awakening them that they could use this the ones that are interested in moving like this.
Yeah.
That I haven't been using because they're just firing off together. It's harmonising.
Get greater clarification of the function of differentiating and integrating.
I would see it more as an efficiency of neuronal firing rather than an increasing or a decreasing.
Okay.
Yep. Next. In life, we're constantly tinkering with our body image because at some levels we all struggle with it. That's me being pessimistic, but it's true. It's not. Or is it just me? And think of ways you've experienced a change in your body image during your life. So, I've given you my smashing my fingernail. That changed my body image for my finger for a while, and now it's all back integrated, if you like. I disintegrated for a while. When you've had injuries. Sorry?
Pregnant.
Yep, pregnancy changes it, your body image. And you have to adapt because you've got a different load distribution, different muscle activity. And then your self-image changes because your world expands. I don't mean in your belly. I mean, that one becomes 2, and that's a whole major shift in body image. And the blurring between you and the baby is quite amazing. And then that whole thing about, a new creature emerges sort of thing, and this amazing relationship, with the sort of, that always had that sort of boomerang thing, like, the umbilical cord's not there, but, Eddie would go that far away, but then, and then they go that far away, and then that far away. So that's all part of my part of my body image. And of course I'm sharing my body still if I'm breastfeeding, and not, so those sorts of things are really important parts of of our identity. And there is something, when Jenny was talking about that, I becomes we when we put our hands on something. Obviously, breastfeeding is very like that. If I pick up a tool, so if I pick up a hammer, that hammer becomes part of my body image, because then I start feeling through the end of the hammer. So even though I don't actually have receptors in the end of the hammer, I'm feeling the nail. In fact, I feel the nail really badly because I'm really bad at hammering. Just like when I'm in the car, I'm feeling the road. I feel the road through my bum, through the car chassis, through the tyres. So it's very extended, but now that car and I become kind of one thing. That we can become kind of with it, yeah. Yeah. There is an interaction, yeah. Yeah. And whether you know it or not, whether it becomes a crutch or not. So we're constantly shifting that one of the ADT dancers, actually the one where I got the visual imagery stuff from, that was one of their whole things about when a dancer connects with another one, about what that means in terms of a shared nervous system, and then disengaging and coming back. And it was a great show. So there's all of that stuff. Oh, we won't do the experiment, but you can do it at home. It's an AY lesson. I think it's called the dominant hand, and it's an unusual ATM because it is quite on one side in one body part, which is why we chose it. So we did an experiment where we randomised. We had a whole bunch of volunteers, they were uni students, and we randomised them to have this ATM. So you can do it in a chair. And why I'm doing this is because actually maybe Julie uses it. She might have used it in April as one of her little... Sorry? Yeah. But you do this, and then you lift up your finger, and then you bring your thumb together, and then you connect it up through here. So we did that in a chair. So we randomised 1/3 to do that on the dominant hand, 1/3 to do it on the non-dominant hand, and then the other third did a sham group. So it was a control group where they did a relaxation class in the chair, just a whole relaxed thing. And we tested them before, so they had to write something with their dominant hand, write something with their non-dominant hand. They had to rate how hard or easy it felt. Then we did a pegboard, so how fast they could transfer pegs over. It's a standardised test. And we've got this funny little device that measures how well you grip and lift something, so how well you match the grip force with the lifting force. We did that before, and then we did it all again afterwards. And we had hypothesised that when they did the ATM on the non-dominant side, that because it wasn't as dexterous, it would get more dexterous. Guess what happened? The dexterous hand got more dexterous. The non-dominant hand got a bit more dexterous, but not as much. And the relaxation group, no change. Now, they were blinded. They didn't know which of those, we didn't tell them which was the one that we thought was going to work. So they thought, the ones who were in the relaxation group thought that we were testing relaxation. So that was a really nice study. And the way the dexterous group got faster, and they got better at not over-gripping on this little grip task. So they got more sensitive. And we don't know how long it lasted for. It took us about an hour to do the testing, so we know it lasted for about an hour. But we also asked them, like I often ask you, how does the hand that you worked with feel compared to the other hand? Now, obviously, the relaxation group, we said, how do you feel any difference between your two hands? Obviously, they went, no, nothing. There's no change from before or after. So we asked them about change before compared to after, and then left versus right, or dominant versus non-dominant. But this is what they said between the left and the right was the dominant and the non-dominant, whichever one they did the lesson on. So you can see how highly varied people's responses are to a lesson. And it's not always positive. So these people had never done Feldenkrais. I didn't talk to them about what Feldenkrais was. I didn't call it Feldenkrais. There was no coaching of any kind, no expectation. But lighter and bigger, so you know what a word cloud is, the more responses people have, the bigger the letter. So that means that the most common response was lighter, and well, the two most common responses were lighter and bigger. But heavier is there, sharper, duller. So these are spontaneous words from a naive population. So we were quite fascinated by this. It's interesting, isn't it? Well, I find it fascinating. That's, you know, some of it's not necessarily like throbbing. That's weird, isn't it? More awake, not as relaxed, smaller, easier, tighter, blah, blah, blah. More in control, colder, you know, whatever. Or more controlled. So when you are asking people to sort of describe how they feel after an ATM, brace yourself for quite a few different responses. So that was quite a nice little study a couple of years ago. And I think that's almost it. One more. How do we evaluate someone else's body image? Well, can we sense what they're focusing on? What are they missing? How do they feel about themselves? And how do they feel about themselves in relation to their acting and in their environment? So next time, have these sorts of things in mind. You know, when you're starting to do FI, or even when you're watching people walking in for an ATM, these are the kinds of questions you have in the back of your mind. It's what is their image of themselves? And our job as Feldenkrais practitioners is to help them clarify that image so that it's more accurate, it's more complete, so that they know the different parts, but they also know how they go together, if you like. So it's both the differentiation and the integration, and then how they feel about them. So that if somebody really hates their feet, for example, that you can kind of work with that. You don't have to ask them. Certainly in FI, it's good to know that sort of stuff. And I think the last slide is that I'm suggesting that we think about this body image as a matrix, means it's multi-component, that all interact. That's the notion of a matrix. And I use this slide for non-Feldy people as well, but what you can recognise in there is it's actually thinking, feeling, sensing and doing, but in different language, sneak up on people. So, you know, the feelings and emotions, the ideals, the sort of thinking stuff, psychosocial, environmental, the acting stuff, and then the sensing stuff. So have those things in mind when you're working with people. All right, so does that help tie in that article that you read from Zoran? I thought, actually, because I forgot, if I'd used the presentation from Feldenkrais practitioners, there's some fantastic Alexander Yanai, other things where he talks about self-image, where he then talks more about the personality aspect of it that comes into body image. But if you think about body image with all of those components, and then the self-image is the body image plus all the sort of the personality side of things as well, that's self-image. But I'll send you the link to that, the self-image talk. I think it's in the 200s. Can't remember. Anyway, oh yeah, so there you go, small tool. Have you done the small tool ATM? Huh? Yeah, if you're all looking at me in a puzzled way, no. All right, so we'll make sure that you have there's a couple of ATMs, one in particular, where you really play with your perception of whether you're small or tall. That's why we call it the small tool. And so you flick, and you practice flicking between these two different perceptions of small tool. Small tool, small tool. I never forget, Russell Delman taught it in my training. I don't remember a lot about my training, I do remember that. So that's the small tool. I think that's it. Questions? Oh, that's for us. The small tool. Small tool. Too small. I can't remember what the moves are. I can only remember the scans. I'd have to look it up. So I think because you're all going to disappear, we'll finish at 4. Is that all right? Unless you've all got, your Ubers coming at 4:30. Questions? Comments? Done. Cooked. Enough. Yeah, Jeff hasn't got back to me, so clearly he doesn't like my question. What do you think? Don't know. Might be busy. You never know in the States.